Guests mocked the black maid for folding the napkins wrong, until the Mafia boss fixed theirs instead. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to Alicia Brooks. The evening had just begun when her hands started to tremble. Not from fear exactly, but from that quiet pressure she felt every time she stepped into the Moretti estate's grand dining hall. A room washed in warm chandelier light, polished floors reflecting every movement like a mirror, and guests dressed in silks that whispered when they walked. Alicia stood at the end of the 12-foot oak table, folding the napkins the way she'd been trained. Crisp edges, soft center pinch, a gentle fan that opened like a flower. She'd practiced it hundreds of times. It was the one part of her shift she genuinely loved. But tonight, guests watched her with the kind of smirking amusement that made the air feel sharper. Tiffany Hale leaned back in her chair, swirling her sparkling water as if evaluating a performance gone wrong. "She's doing it crooked," Tiffany announced loudly enough for the room to hear, though the napkin in Alicia's hand was perfectly symmetrical. Brad Sutton let out a short laugh, the kind meant to sting. "Maybe she's never seen a properly folded napkin before. Do they teach that where she's from?" The others chuckled. Their voices bounced off the marble, gathering eyes from tables nearby. Alicia kept folding, her fingers steady even as her cheeks warmed. She told herself to breathe, to stay focused, to disappear the way staff were expected to. But humiliation has a way of finding its mark. Tiffany tapped her manicured nail against the table. "Sweetheart, it's not that hard. Watch." She snatched a napkin, fumbled with it, then held up something wrinkled and lopsided. "See? Like that." Brad whistled as if she'd performed magic. Alicia swallowed, her chest tight. She knew correcting them was not an option. She simply picked up another napkin, smoothing the linen carefully, silently hoping the moment would pass. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that up on the mezzanine landing, half hidden behind the carved banister, Vincent Moretti had stopped mid-conversation. His eyes were fixed on the scene below, unreadable, still as stone. And in that suspended moment, the room held its breath without realizing it. The chandelier lights glowed softly as Alicia moved along the length of the table, gathering the rumpled napkins that had slipped from her hands earlier. She kept her gaze low, trying to quiet the familiar heaviness in her chest. Every shift at the Moretti estate mattered. Every hour meant another payment toward her mother's medication. Another night, she could afford to keep the lights on in their small apartment on the south side. She had taken the job because it was steady and honest, even if the walls of this mansion reminded her daily of all the things she had never had. Alicia worked hard, the kind of hard that left her feet aching and her spine tight, but she had always taken pride in doing things well. Folding napkins was simple, precise, almost calming. It was one of the few tasks that made her feel competent in a world that often chose not to see her. Tonight, though, the mood was different. This event was larger than usual, a gathering of people whose perfume lingered in the air long after they passed, whose laughter rose and fell like they owned every room they stepped into. The Moretti estate was buzzing with staff preparing dishes, adjusting floral arrangements, and making sure each polished surface stayed perfect. Alicia had arrived early, reviewing her checklist twice, telling herself she could get through the night like any other. But those guests had noticed her instantly. Or rather, they had noticed the opportunity to make her feel small. She tried to push the moment aside, telling herself they were simply bored, that their cruelty was not personal. Yet she could not shake the way Tiffany's smile had widened when she saw the embarrassment flare across Alicia's face. The sound of quiet footsteps shifted the air behind her, but Alicia assumed it was another server. She continued gathering the napkins, smoothing the fabric so they would not wrinkle before the dinner bell. She did not know that Vincent Moretti had paused a few feet away, watching the way she steadied her breathing. Before reaching for another linen square, Vincent rarely attended the preparation phase of his own events. His schedule was full, and the staff were trained well enough to manage without him. But something about tonight had brought him downstairs earlier than usual, perhaps the need to ensure everything was perfect, or perhaps an instinct he could not explain. From where he stood, He saw the tension in Alicia's shoulders, the slight shake in her hands that she tried to hide. He heard the remnants of muffled laughter from across the room, the kind that revealed more about a person's character than their finest clothes. Alicia continued working, unaware of his presence, lost in the quiet mantra she repeated to herself on difficult days. Stay calm, stay steady, stay dignified. And in the vast, echoing room, that dignity was the only thing she felt she still had control over. Across the dining hall, laughter rose again, sharper this time, as if the guests had found new amusement in watching Alicia pretend their words did not bruise. Tiffany lifted another napkin from the stack and waved it toward her friends, holding it between two fingers as though it were something unpleasant. "Look at this," she said, the corners of her mouth curving with exaggerated pity. "She keeps folding them like she is decorating a children's party." Brad leaned forward, elbows on the table, his tone dripping with mock instruction. "Maybe she needs a demonstration. Should we teach her how normal people fold napkins?" The others chuckled, and the sound settled over the table like a thin layer of ice. Alicia kept her focus on the linens, though her pulse tapped against her collarbone. She told herself to breathe slowly, to anchor her movements in the small rituals she relied on during moments like this. Smooth the linen. Crease the edges. Keep your hands steady. She was almost done resetting the place settings when one of the guests nudged a water glass just far enough that it tipped against a napkin she had placed moments earlier. It slid off the table and landed at her feet. Brad clapped softly as if she had dropped it herself. "Oh no," he said in a mock sympathetic tone. "Maybe try again. Third time is the charm, right?" Alicia bent to pick it up, not trusting her voice to remain even if she answered. The polished floor reflected her silhouette as she kneeled, and for a moment she felt as though the entire room were watching her smallness echo back at her. When she rose, she noticed Tiffany giving her friends a knowing look, the kind that signaled another joke forming. Tiffany tilted her head, studying Alicia the way someone might study an object rather than a person. "Sweetheart," she said loudly, "you really should lighten your touch. Napkins are not supposed to look like they have been squeezed." Her friends laughed again. It was not the volume of their laughter that stung, but the ease of it, the casual way they dismissed her humanity to fill the space with their own entertainment. Alicia kept her eyes on the table, placing the freshly folded napkin exactly where it belonged. She reminded herself she had survived worse. Double shifts at the hospital laundry, nights she studied by flashlight because the power bill had not been paid, mornings she skipped breakfast so her mother would not notice there was not enough food. But humiliation was its own kind of hunger, hollow and lingering. She reached for another napkin, steadying her breath. In her periphery, she saw the faintest movement, not from the guests, who were now whispering with gleeful anticipation, but from the edge of the room where Vincent Moretti had stepped closer, his expression unreadable. Alicia did not see his eyes narrow slightly as he took in the scene, nor the way the room seemed to shift subtly around his presence, like a tide preparing to change direction. She only knew that the air felt different, as if something had settled into place, quiet and unseen, waiting for its moment. The laughter faded into a low hum as Alicia focused on resetting the silverware, trying to keep her breathing even. Her hands moved with practiced grace, yet inside she felt the tremor of old memories stirring, the ones she worked hard to bury beneath responsibility and routine. Moments like this had a way of reaching back into her past, pulling forward the echoes she wished would stay quiet. She remembered being 12 years old, carrying her lunch tray through the school cafeteria while a group of kids blocked her path, amused by the way her voice shook when she asked them to move. She remembered cleaning motel rooms with her mother during summers, pretending not to hear the comments from guests who thought whispered insults carried no weight. Those memories pressed against her now, blending with the sound of Tiffany's laughter drifting behind her. Alicia straightened a fork that did not need straightening, focusing on the details because they were the only things she could control. She had learned to survive by shrinking her presence, by moving gently around the edges of wealth and entitlement. But tonight her patience felt stretched thin, not because she wanted confrontation, but because there was a deeper ache beneath it all. She wanted to be treated with basic respect, the kind that did not depend on uniforms or job titles. Across the table, Tiffany lifted her glass again, watching Alicia with an expression that almost looked curious. Look at her, she whispered to the group, not knowing her voice carried farther than she intended. She is acting like this is the most important job in the world. Brad chuckled. Maybe it is, for her. Alicia heard it. She always heard it. The words settled on her like extra weight, pressing just enough to bruise, but not enough to break the surface. She kept her gaze on the tablecloth, tracing the embroidered pattern with her eyes as if the threads could calm the sting inside her chest. A soft shift of air behind her made her pause for a moment, though she did not turn. She assumed it was another server passing through, but something about it felt different, quieter, more deliberate. She shook off the thought and continued arranging the place settings. In the reflection of a polished serving dome, she caught a faint, blurred image of herself, shoulders drawn tight, jaw clenched, eyes hiding more than she wished. For a moment, she felt an urge to step away, to find a hallway where she could breathe without an audience. But she stayed. She always stayed. She picked up another napkin and folded it with care, reminding herself why she was here, why she endured long shifts and moments like this. Her mother needed her. Their home depended on her. Her dreams, though delayed, still lived quietly inside her. As she placed the last folded linen on the table, she did not realize that Vincent Moretti had moved even closer, studying not just the careless cruelty unfolding before him, but the quiet endurance of the woman standing at the center of it. The dining hall had grown quieter in a subtle, almost imperceptible way, the kind of shift that happens when an unseen presence begins to anchor the room. Alicia continued adjusting the final details on the table, unaware that Vincent Moretti now stood close enough to catch the small tremble in her fingertips. He observed without speaking, his expression composed yet sharpened by something deeper. He had seen guests behave poorly before, but there was a particular tone in Tiffany's laughter, a deliberate edge that made the air feel colder. Vincent's gaze drifted to Alicia's posture, the way she held herself slightly inward, as if trying to fold her dignity into the spaces between the silverware and the napkins she placed so carefully. It told him more than any words could. Tiffany, unaware of the audience she had just gained, tapped her fingernail against the dessert spoon and sighed dramatically. Is she really still doing it wrong? She asked, leaning back in her chair as if she were the host rather than the guest. I mean, someone should show her. It is honestly painful to watch. Another guest stifled a laugh behind a raised hand, while Brad lifted a napkin and twisted it clumsily. Maybe she just needs a little help, he said, shaping the linen into something uneven and wrinkled. Here you go, he called out, holding it toward Alicia like a gift she should be grateful for. Try copying this one. Alicia paused for a brief second, the napkin she held balanced delicately between her palms. She turned slowly, offering a polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Thank you, sir, she said softly, her voice steady only because she willed it to be. She took the napkin and smoothed it gently, her fingers gliding over the wrinkles left by his careless hands. Her movements were patient, respectful, the kind that came from years of learning to stay calm, even when the moment invited anything but calm. But inside, something shifted. It was not anger exactly. It was a quiet sorrow, a reminder that no matter how hard she worked or how carefully she shaped her life, there were always spaces where people felt entitled to chip away at her humanity without consequence. From where he stood, Vincent saw the moment that sorrow flickered across her features. It was quick, almost invisible, yet unmistakable to someone who understood the weight of silent endurance. His jaw tightened slightly, though no one noticed. The guests continued to amuse themselves, unaware that the dynamic in the room had changed, unaware that the man whose home they stood in had stepped fully into the scene. Alicia placed the newly folded napkin back on the table with precise care, her breath steadying as she centered it perfectly. She did not lift her eyes. She did not see Vincent watching her, but the room did. Slowly, conversations tapered off. A few guests glanced toward him, sensing his presence before recognizing it. His posture was relaxed, yet there was an unmistakable gravity that began to settle over the table, like the last quiet moment before a truth reveals itself. The quiet shift in the room deepened as Vincent stepped forward, not with haste, but with the steady certainty of a man who rarely needed to raise his voice to be heard. Alicia, still focused on aligning the silverware, did not realize he was now only a few feet away. What she did sense was an unusual stillness settling behind her, a pause in the rhythm of the evening that made the hairs along her arms lift in awareness. Tiffany noticed him first. Her smile froze in place, not quite slipping, but losing its easy confidence. Brad straightened in his chair, subtly adjusting his posture, the way people often did when they recognized authority entering a space they had treated too casually. Vincent's presence did not rely on theatrics. It was in the way he held himself, in the quiet intensity of his gaze as he studied the table, then the guests, then the napkin Brad had folded poorly. He reached for it without speaking, lifting the wrinkled linen between his hands. The room's attention tightened around him like a gathering thread. Alicia finally sensed enough to turn slightly, her eyes widening a fraction when she saw who stood beside her. She stepped back instinctively, unsure if she had done something wrong, unsure whether she should apologize for being in his path. Vincent did not look at her yet. Instead, he focused on the napkin in his hands, smoothing it delicately across his palm. His fingertips glided over the creases left by the guest's mockery, and for a moment he simply observed the imperfections, as if studying a problem he intended to solve. Then, with slow, deliberate precision, he began to fold it properly. His movements were quiet, methodical, familiar, almost elegant in their simplicity. The room watched as the linen transformed in his hands, each crease sharp, each fold aligned perfectly, until the napkin resembled the ones Alicia had placed around the table with such care. He set it down on the edge of the table, not in front of Alicia, but directly in front of Brad. Only then did he lift his gaze. "If you are going to offer a demonstration," Vincent said, his tone calm and level, "it should at least be a correct one." There was no anger in his voice, only clarity, the kind that left very little room for misunderstanding. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Tiffany lifted her chin, trying to maintain her earlier confidence, but her voice wavered slightly. "We were only having a little fun. No harm meant." Vincent's eyes moved to her slowly, the faintest pause weighing her words. "Fun," he repeated softly, as if testing whether the word fit what he had witnessed. His gaze drifted briefly to Alicia, who stood still as a breath caught in a moment of disbelief. Then he looked back at the guests, his expression unreadable. "In my home," he said, "we treat people with respect, especially those who work hard to make this place run." A hush fell over the hall, a quiet that lingered with unmistakable consequence. For the first time that evening, the guests had nothing to say. For a long moment, the dining hall remained suspended in a kind of delicate silence, the kind that settles when everyone realizes the balance of the room has shifted in a direction they did not expect. Brad stared at the perfectly folded napkin in front of him, his earlier confidence shrinking beneath the weight of Vincent's calm reprimand. Tiffany's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass, the sparkle in her expression dimming as she tried to gather a response that never quite formed. Alicia, standing beside the table with her hands gently clasped in front of her apron, felt her breath catch in a way she could not fully explain. She had not expected anyone to intervene, much less the man who rarely addressed staff unless necessary. She certainly had not expected him to do it with such quiet certainty, such unmistakable clarity of intention. Her instinct told her to step back, to disappear into the background as she had trained herself to do, but her feet did not move. Vincent finally shifted his attention toward her, the edge of his gaze softening when it reached her face. There was no impatience, no reprimand, only a steady acknowledgement that made her feel seen in a way she was not accustomed to. "Miss Brooks," he said evenly, "please continue your work. You are doing it correctly." A subtle warmth rose in her cheeks, not from embarrassment this time, but from the unexpected validation. She lowered her eyes briefly in gratitude. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. The hierarchy of the evening had changed, and though no explicit correction had been given beyond a single folded napkin and a quiet expectation of respect, the message was unmistakable. A sense of accountability hovered in the air, firm but composed. Tiffany attempted a light laugh, but it faltered quickly. "We did not mean anything by it," she murmured, offering a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. Vincent regarded her with a polite but distant nod, the kind that closed the conversation rather than inviting it to continue. "I am sure," he said, though the evenness of his tone made it clear he was not particularly interested in elaboration. Some of the other guests began adjusting their posture, smoothing their napkins, and lowering their voices, as if performing a quiet correction of their own behavior. The earlier air of casual superiority dissolved into something more careful. Alicia resumed placing the napkins around the table, her movements steady but changed. There was a new ease in her hands, a soft exhale she had not felt since the evening began. She still worked diligently, but for the first time that night, she did not feel small. Vincent stepped slightly aside, allowing her space to continue, but his presence remained a gentle anchor in the room, a silent assurance that the moment of mockery had ended. The chandeliers above cast a warm glow across the table, and in that gentle light, the room felt different, as if the foundation beneath it had shifted just enough for everyone to notice. And in that quiet, Alicia found herself standing a little taller than before. The evening continued with a quieter rhythm, the kind that follows after a truth has settled over a room, and everyone present is forced to sit with it. Alicia moved along the table with renewed steadiness, each napkin placed with gentle precision, each gesture reflecting a dignity that had never left her, even when others tried to strip it away. She felt the weight in her chest begin to ease, replaced by something warmer, something anchored. She stole a small breath, letting it settle. The guests, once so eager to laugh, now watched her with a caution they had not shown earlier. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Their eyes no longer carried amusement or superiority. Instead, they carried something resembling awareness, the quiet recognition that their actions had not gone unnoticed, and that their assumptions had not landed the way they expected. Tiffany touched the rim of her glass, avoiding Alicia's gaze entirely. Her earlier confidence had slipped into something smaller, more tentative. Brad fidgeted with the cuff of his sleeve, the perfect napkin in front of him a reminder of what had just occurred. No one dared comment anymore. Alicia sensed the change, but did not linger on it. She focused on her work, letting the familiar motions ground her. She felt a strange clarity, the kind that comes after a storm passes and leaves behind a stillness that almost feels unreal. She did not look toward Vincent again, though she could sense that he had not moved far. His presence remained steady, almost protective in a way she did not fully understand. Vincent watched her with a quiet deliberation. It was not pity. It was not rescue. It was something deeper, a recognition of someone who carried themselves with grace even when the world tested them without cause. He had seen many people in his home, countless individuals drifting in and out of his orbit, but very few held their composure the way she did under scrutiny. As Alicia placed the final napkin at the head of the table, she paused just long enough to let her hand rest flat against the linen. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the care she put into her work. She stood a little taller, her shoulders no longer drawn inward, her breath no longer shallow. The truth was simple. She had not needed anyone to fight for her. But being seen, being acknowledged, had restored something inside her that she had learned to live without. The chandeliers reflected softly across the silverware, casting warm streaks of light across the polished surfaces. For a moment, the room felt gentle again. Vincent's eyes met hers briefly when she lifted her gaze, and there was something unspoken there, a shared understanding that did not require words. Respect, quiet and unmistakable. In that silence, Alicia realized something she had always known but rarely felt confirmed. Dignity was not granted by others. It lived in her, steady and unbroken, even on nights like this. The dining hall eased into a gentle hum as staff prepared the final touches for the evening, yet an undeniable shift lingered in the air, as if the walls themselves remembered the moment that had just unfolded. Alicia stepped back to review the table one last time, letting her eyes travel over every detail she had shaped with care. The napkins were folded perfectly, aligned in a soft rhythm of linen and symmetry, untouched by the earlier mockery. She let her breath settle, slow and steady, grounding herself in the quiet pride of a task done well. Nearby, the guests attempted to resume their conversations, but their voices carried a new restraint, their words careful, their glances subdued. Tiffany lifted her glass, but the gesture lacked its earlier flourish. Her gaze drifted briefly toward Alicia, and for the first time that night, there was no trace of ridicule in her expression. only the faint shadow of someone reflecting on their own behavior. Brad adjusted his place setting again, though it was already perfect. He avoided looking in Alicia's direction entirely, as if acknowledging her might deepen his discomfort. Vincent, standing a short distance from the table, watched the scene unfold with a calmness that seemed carved from something deeper than authority. He did not seek praise, nor did he expect recognition for what he had done. His eyes followed Alicia instead, studying the subtle way she carried herself now, shoulders relaxed, breath unburdened. She stepped away from the table, preparing to move on to the next part of her duties. For a moment, Vincent spoke quietly enough that only she could hear him. "Miss Brooks," he said, his tone gentle but unmistakably firm. "If anyone speaks to you that way again, you let me know." Alicia paused, taken aback by the sincerity in his words. She had heard countless promises in her life, many empty, many spoken with good intentions, but little follow-through. Yet something in the steadiness of his voice made her believe this was different. She met his eyes for the briefest second, and in that exchange there was no hierarchy, no distance. Only recognition. "Thank you, sir," she replied softly. "I appreciate that." He gave a single nod, subtle but meaningful, before stepping back to allow the staff to continue their work. As Alicia moved toward the service hallway, she felt a quiet shift inside her, a restoration she had not known she needed. The room behind her resumed its soft cadence, but the energy had changed, shaped by a moment of truth that no one would soon forget. She carried that awareness with her, the understanding that even in places where she felt invisible, her dignity remained intact, steady, unbroken. And somewhere behind her, Vincent watched her leave, his expression thoughtful, as if he, too, understood that something important had settled into the foundation of the night. In the warm glow of the chandeliers, the Moretti estate felt different, just slightly, just enough. A reminder echoing quietly through the room. Respect costs nothing, yet its absence reveals everything.